Jogging along the quiet path that connected my modest office to my house about 2 miles away, I was feeling pretty wound up from leaving some work tasks unfinished. I'd spent the better part of an hour tinkering with them, but finally swapped my jeans and work shirt for shorts, a t-shirt, sneakers, and a headband, deciding to jog home to grab a few papers. A stack of maybe 20 pages might help clear my head. About half a mile from home, I noticed a guy up ahead, maybe 200 yards away, which was unusual since this path mostly led straight to my place, and it wasn't the type of trail where I ran into other people. It was secluded, bordered by a cliff at the back, and practically felt like my own personal route. He looked like he was cutting through toward the back of my house, which made me quicken my pace and angle around the next corner to get a better view. To my surprise, he was at my back patio door, and the door wasn't locked. I stopped and took a moment to process this strange scene, suddenly remembering that my wife, Emily, was supposed to be working from home that day. I rushed to the door, but it was locked, so I used my key to get inside. Sliding open the patio door as quietly as I could, I glanced around the empty kitchen. Her laptop and work stuff were scattered across the table, confirming she was, in fact, there. Upstairs, I heard faint noises coming from the dining room, which was just around the corner from the kitchen. I had this old police baton, a relic from my grandfather, which served as both a keepsake and a bit of protection. Holding on to it, I made my way up the stairs quietly. When I reached the master bedroom door, which was closed, I could make out muffled sounds from inside. With my heart pounding, I gripped the handle and eased the door open. What I saw floored me. There was the guy in nothing but his running shorts, about to get in bed with my wife, Emily, who was completely bare. Shocked, I advanced toward them, giving him a solid whack across the backside with my baton. He let out a yell, grabbing his rear, while Emily, wide-eyed, just stared at me, her expression as blank as her naked body. Then it hit me. This guy wasn't just any stranger. It was Ethan Shaw, Emily's boss. He jumped up, nursing his bruised rear end, and stammered something about being invited. I shot a look at Emily, but she stayed dead silent, not even an apology in her eyes. Then Ethan squared up and threw a threat my way, telling me I'd better step back or he'd take my baton and give me a taste of it. The arrogance was dripping off him as he stood there, stark naked in my own bedroom, like he had the upper hand. I knew nothing about the man, and he knew just as little about me. But what he definitely didn't know was my swing. With years of tennis practice behind me, I knew my backhand could leave a lasting impression. I could tell he was a bit rattled as I smirked. In a burst of overconfidence, he lunged at me from a few feet away. Quick as a flash, I sent a backhand swing toward his face. He didn't dodge in time, and the baton connected with the right side of his forehead. He dropped to the floor like a sack of bricks, and for a moment, I just looked down at him, processing what I'd just done. Emily was still in some kind of trance, her eyes glazed and even a little drool on her chin. Surveying the room, I noticed a cell phone on the dresser, its camera pointed straight at the bed. The idiot had been recording it all. Picking up the phone, I opened the dial pad and called emergency services. "What's your emergency?" they asked. "Jake Carter here. I'm at 12 Arbor Circle. I just defended myself against an intruder in my bedroom. He's hurt, maybe seriously. And my wife. I think she might be on something. She's awake, but totally unresponsive. We need help fast." The operator's voice was calm but firm. "If you're armed, please disarm yourself, and we'll approach cautiously. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand," I replied, heading downstairs, baton in hand. I set it down on the sofa and stepped outside to wait, arms at my sides, as the sirens grew louder. A police car rolled up first, followed by an ambulance. 2 officers got out, a man and a woman, neither of them drawing their guns. The female officer, who seemed to be in charge, called out, "Mr. Carter?" "Yes, that's me." "They're upstairs," I responded, leading them back inside and up to the bedroom. I stepped aside as they entered. Emily lay there on the bed, eyes vacant. Ethan was still motionless. One officer checked his pulse and called for more paramedics. Turning to Emily, she asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" but got no response. As paramedics arrived, I backed off, letting them tend to Ethan, while another medical team arrived. Sergeant Jordan Tate, who was in charge, retrieved a robe from the closet, wrapped Emily in it, and directed her to the guest bedroom. She then signaled me to follow. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere, but keep out of the way," she instructed. Taking a breath, I retreated to the kitchen, pulling out a small computer from my desk drawer. I transferred the video from Shaw's phone, backing it up, and sent a copy to my office email before powering the phone down and leaving it on Emily's desk. From the kitchen, I watched as paramedics loaded Ethan into the ambulance and sped away. Soon after, a female officer brought Emily into the living room, keeping her seated away from me. She kept her head down, dressed in nothing but a robe and sneakers. Then Sergeant Tate joined me in the kitchen, alongside an older, plainclothes detective named Mark Whitman. Sergeant Tate introduced me to Detective Mark Whitman, even though he and I already knew each other well. While I'd shifted my legal work to civil cases these days, I used to be in criminal defense, and I'd had a good number of cases with Detective Whitman back then. I respected him, and we'd always had a solid working relationship. "Hey, Jake, I'm really sorry about what happened," he said. "Do you recognize the man you struck?" "Yeah, he's my wife's boss, Ethan Shaw," I replied. "Know where he lives?" he asked. "We found his clothes, his sports gear, even a credit card, but no ID." "I don't know much about him, honestly," I admitted. "As of a year ago, he was married with kids in school, but that's about it." "Was there any sign before today that he and your wife had a thing going on?" "Not a single one, until now," I replied, still in disbelief. Then I ran him through everything, from deciding to go for that jog to grabbing the phone to call emergency services, making sure I left out nothing. "There was no intent here, Mark. I just reacted." "Did you recognize Shaw when you first saw him outside?" he asked. "No, it wasn't until I saw him standing by the bed that I knew who he was," I replied. "You hit him on the backside first?" "Yeah, I didn't aim to hurt him too badly, just enough to get him off her, even if that wasn't what she wanted." "Then he went at me, threatening to take the baton and use it on me," I said. "He even let out a roar, trying to spook me. It worked, but when he lunged, I swung lower, aiming for his cheek. He must have ducked because it hit him right on the forehead instead." Whitman nodded. "All right, we're testing your wife for any medications, but as of now, she's not implicated. Once she's alert, she should be able to back up your story." "Oh, and this phone. Shaw left it recording everything. I used it to call emergency and then left it out in the open. When I went outside, a tech answered it," I explained, still wondering what would happen to Emily. Whitman suggested we go check on her, and with Sergeant Tate, we walked over to the living room. Emily sat there with an officer and a medic nearby. Whitman asked, "How's Mrs. Carter doing?" The medic replied, "We're taking her to the county hospital to be safe. She's in shock, but her vitals are stable." I looked at Emily, and in that moment, her eyes met mine. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Jake," she mumbled, before slipping back into her trance-like state. I called out, "Emily? Emily?" But she was gone again, unresponsive. A few minutes later, they loaded her into an ambulance. I went to the basement, changed into fresh clothes, and followed them in my car. The police were still in the house, promising to either secure it or leave someone on watch. I called Emily's parents, who lived a couple of hours away in the next state, and gave them a short rundown, promising to keep them updated from the hospital. Emily and I had been together since she was 21 and fresh out of college, just as I was finishing up law school. She quickly landed a job at Ethan Shaw's insurance firm and worked her way up from a clerk to being his assistant in the department that handled housing and auto insurance. We'd been married for over 6 years, and I had always believed we were strong. Today had upended that belief. Looking back, I couldn't imagine this affair being anything but consensual, unless he'd somehow manipulated her in a way I didn't understand. But there hadn't been time for anything like that. She'd probably been waiting for him, likely undressed, and had left the back door unlocked on purpose. How long had this been going on? I had no idea. I loved Emily deeply. She was beautiful, cheerful, and warm. Our intimate life was satisfying, even amid our busy routines, especially on weekends. My civil law practice brought steadier hours, which meant more time together. So, the scene I walked in on just didn't make sense to me. Physically, Shaw was a bigger guy, But what unfolded today showed me he wasn't necessarily the better man where it counted. Then again, who could really tell from just one incident? When I reached the hospital, I spotted Shaw's wife in the ER lobby, but she didn't seem to notice me, and I left it at that. Instead, I asked about Emily and was eventually allowed into her room, where she lay asleep. Standing beside her, I tried to make sense of what she'd done and the enormous rift it had just put between us. I knew I needed to understand what had really happened before I could start deciding on my next steps. A female doctor entered the room, a middle-aged woman with a calm but serious look. "I'm Dr. Moore. Are you her husband?" I nodded. "Yes, I am." "What's her condition?" "She's had a mental shock, which has caused her to lose consciousness temporarily. Once she wakes, she should gradually return to normal," the doctor explained. "When might she wake up?" "Probably within 3 or 4 hours, depending on how much she had in her system." "Thank you," I said, deciding to stay by her side. Just as she was about to leave, I stopped her. "What about Ethan Shaw? How is he?" She studied me for a moment. "Are you family?" "No, just an acquaintance." She looked down briefly before saying, "Unfortunately, he's in a medically induced coma due to a severe head injury." With that, she left. I thought about Shaw's condition, half wondering if I'd ended his life. Now, it was clear he wasn't dead. But what did that mean for me, for Emily, for all of us? I called her parents again and shared what I'd learned. They offered to come by, but I told them not to rush. Emily and I needed to face this ourselves, to deal with the implications of her affair with her boss and whatever came next. Emily's mom, Clara, had been calling nonstop. She was deeply concerned, saying Emily hadn't seemed like herself recently. She urged me to give Emily a chance to explain. I promised I would, though deep down, I doubted it would make a difference. "I'll let her explain, Clara," I said. "But after today, I don't know." Later, I spotted Mrs. Shaw in the ICU waiting room. "Mrs. Shaw?" I called gently. She looked up, studying me with a guarded expression. "Yes? Do you have something to say?" "No, ma'am. I'm Jake Carter. My wife works for your husband. They seem to know each other." She was a tall woman in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that bore into me. She arched an eyebrow. "Know each other?" "Yes," I replied, meeting her gaze. "This morning, I found them together. In my bedroom. They were, undressed." Her eyes flickered slightly, but her expression barely changed. "So, you're the one who hit him?" "That's right." "Sorry. Not really," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, as if it didn't surprise her. "Ethan's been strange lately, always excusing himself, saying he had work when he'd usually be at home. I started to suspect it was more about your wife than work, but I couldn't confirm it until now." Her detached response took me aback. "Did they give you any update on his condition?" I asked. "Only that surgery might be necessary," she said, letting out a small sigh. "Best of luck to you, Mr. Carter. I'll be here waiting. My kids are with my parents. They're used to him being gone." I nodded, leaving the ICU to clear my head outside. This whole mess was weighing me down, and as much as I wanted clarity, I knew I had to wait for Emily's version. After an hour, I returned to the ER, where Emily was resting behind a curtain. I sat beside her, and eventually, I drifted off. I woke to her shifting slightly, muttering incoherently. I quickly found Dr. Moore, who came over to check her vitals. "Looks like she's coming to," Dr. Moore observed, then gently spoke to Emily from behind the curtain. I could hear bits of their conversation. "How are you feeling, Emily? Can you talk?" Dr. Moore asked. Emily's voice was faint. I'm sorry." "Emily, you'll need to stay alert and face what's happened. Jake's nearby, and he wants to talk to you." Emily murmured, "How long will this last? And Ethan, how is he?" Dr. Moore's tone was neutral. "We're not certain. Surgery might be necessary." Emily sighed. "He took a gamble and lost. Maybe I will too." "Perhaps you should talk to Jake soon," Dr. Moore suggested. "I could, or maybe I'll wait till we're home," Emily muttered. I stepped in and said, "Emily, I'll take you home soon, all right?" "Thank you, Jake," she whispered, her voice small. "I'm so sorry." "We'll talk," I replied, glancing at Dr. Moore. When can we leave? Soon. I'll handle the paperwork and bring her some scrubs, she said before stepping away. Emily mumbled an apology as she changed, but I'd already stepped outside, feeling a growing distance between us. I wasn't sure I could look at her in the same way ever again. They wheeled her to the exit, and I picked her up in the car. During the silent drive, Emily looked out the window, wiping silent tears from her face. Once home, I unlocked the door, and we entered what used to be a happy place. She sat in the rocking chair in the living room, while I headed upstairs to check the bedroom. It was a wreck. The carpet had been cut where Shaw had fallen, the bed was stripped bare, and drawers were left half open. The mess seemed to echo everything I discovered. I called Emily's parents to let them know she was home, but discouraged them from visiting. I needed time to process things alone. Back downstairs, I asked, "Need anything? Coffee? Water?" She shook her head. So I took a seat on the couch, keeping a safe distance. We sat in silence until I finally asked, "Emily, what happened? I thought we were good." She looked down at her hands, taking a shaky breath. "It's complicated, Jake. I've worked with Ethan for years and always respected him, but things shifted recently." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. He started making comments about my looks. Just little things at first, compliments I didn't think much about. Then he began getting a little too close, touching my arm, resting his hand on my shoulder. I didn't see it as a big deal initially, but eventually, he asked me out to lunch. Just the two of us. I clenched my jaw. "Didn't that strike you as odd?" "Maybe," she admitted, voice barely a whisper. "But he's attractive, and I was flattered. I didn't want to admit I was interested, but part of me was." "So, you knew he was after you, and you wanted to see where it went?" I asked, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. She lowered her head, burying her face in her hands before meeting my eyes again. "Yes, I wanted it. It wasn't manipulation or being tricked. I knew what I was doing." My chest tightened. "And then what?" Emily took a deep breath, eyes glassy. "We eventually went to dinner, and I asked him why he was pursuing me now, after all this time. He said he'd always wanted me but kept it to himself. Those were his exact words, Jake." "Why, Emily? What was wrong with us that you turned to him?" I asked, struggling to understand. "You're fine, Jake," she replied softly. "But he made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a while. He told me he found me exciting, not routine like I'd become to you. It was flattering. Just the thought of it, well, it got to me. But why didn't you talk to me about this?" She looked away. What was I supposed to say? I'm craving excitement? I didn't think it through. It all happened so fast. "How many times did you sleep with him, Emily?" She shook her head. "Not once. Today was supposed to be the first and the only time. But you showed up. The look on your face when you saw us, it was calm, and then you hit him. I was terrified, not of your anger, but of how controlled you were. I don't buy that this was the first time. I saw him sneaking in through the back door, which you left unlocked. I got upstairs in seconds, and there you both were, undressed. He was inches away from you, and you wanted it too. This couldn't have been the first time." "Jake, please believe me," she pleaded. "We only kissed once in his car 2 days ago. We flirted, but I stopped it. He mentioned coming over after you left for work. It sounds unbelievable, but it's the truth. If you'd seen what I did, would you believe you?" I asked, unable to hide the skepticism in my voice. She sighed. "I don't know. I love you, Jake, not him." But he knew how to get under my skin, make me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in so long. "So he was forceful, and you liked it?" She nodded. "He said exactly what he wanted. And I wanted him, too, but only that once." I leaned back, needing space to think. "Emily, I need time to process this. If I acted on my feelings now, we'd be headed for divorce. I can't erase what I saw." Through her tears, she said, "I know you're hurting, Jake. I love you, and I'm sorry." I stood and headed upstairs, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. In the home office, I turned to Shaw's phone. I found text between him and Emily from the past 2 months, mostly in the evenings, often about lunches together. They met twice a week on the days she was in the office, so it had become a routine. Then I watched the video he'd recorded, which started with Emily leading him upstairs in a short robe. She walked into the bedroom, and he eagerly shed his clothes, practically throwing himself onto the bed. "You look stunning, Emily," he said, positioning the phone on the dresser. "Thank you, Sai," she replied, reclining on the bed. He climbed on top of her, and she welcomed him, whispering, "All right, let's do this. I want it too." That's when I'd entered and struck him. The video captured the loud slap and his pained cry. Watching the scene unfold confirmed she'd wanted this, even if it was their first encounter, as she claimed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the whole story. As her boss, Shaw had an undeniable hold over her, but she'd willingly played along. Returning to the living room, I told Emily I had to head back to the office. By now, it was nearly 3 in the afternoon, and I felt more consumed by anger than worry for her. At the office, I researched divorce laws. Infidelity was grounds for divorce in our state, though rarely used. With a 6-month separation and signed agreement, the process could move smoothly, though it could drag out if she resisted. I wasn't set on divorce yet, but knew I needed separation. I drafted an agreement outlining that we'd live apart, manage finances separately, and abstain from intimacy, both with each other and anyone else. Violating this would allow the other to pursue divorce more quickly. I printed 3 copies and went home. Emily was cooking dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce and salad. She looked different, dressed in a tracksuit with no makeup, barefoot, and avoided eye contact. "It smells good," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Thanks. Need any help?" she offered shyly. "I've got it," I replied, grabbing carrots from the fridge and adding them to the salad. We ate in near silence, accompanied only by the clinking of utensils and a quiet glass of red wine. After dinner, we washed the dishes together in silence. "Let's sit in the living room," I suggested, noticing Emily's nervousness. Once seated, she spoke softly, "Jake, I know I've said this already, but I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out how I let things go this far. I've decided to see a therapist. I need to understand myself." I nodded, feeling a distance between us that seemed impossible to bridge. "It's good you're getting help, but I think we need some space. I'll move out. This house doesn't feel comfortable for me anymore." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Are we ending things?" "I haven't decided yet," I replied, taking a deep breath. "I just need time and space to process everything." I handed her the separation agreement I drafted. She scanned it, silent tears falling. After a moment, she looked up. "I've signed it already, Jake, but could we hold off a few days? I'd like my mom here before things are finalized." I considered her request. "Yeah, we can wait a few days." Emily nodded, her expression pained yet hopeful. "I really am committed to therapy. I'm willing to do anything to make this right. If the therapist suggests it, maybe you could join me for some sessions?" I ran a hand over my face, feeling a mix of exhaustion and anger. "I still love you, Emily, but everything feels broken. You're not the person I thought you were." She began to cry again, and I felt no urge to comfort her. The woman I loved wouldn't have done this. Maybe you're still her in some ways, but right now, it feels like our whole life together was a lie. Without waiting for a reply, I went upstairs, packed a few essentials, and moved into the guest room. I barely slept, my mind looping back to the scene I'd walked in on. Early the next day, I dressed and left for work before Emily woke up, eager to escape the tension. Surprisingly, I found focus in my work, diving into emails and notes, finding some relief in the familiar routine. By lunchtime, I'd even scheduled a viewing for an apartment near my office. By the end of the day, I'd put a deposit down on a short-term lease for a 3-bedroom place, which felt like a step toward reclaiming my own space. Returning home, I entered through the sliding door to the smell of fish stew. The kitchen was warm, and Emily greeted me quietly. "It smells great," I said, managing a polite tone. "Thanks. I made fish stew," she replied, her voice tentative. She glanced at me and added, "My mom's arriving on Saturday. Did you find a place?" "I'm checking out an apartment tomorrow," I said. "Once I'm settled, we can finalize everything. I won't be here Saturday." It doesn't have to be like this, Jake, she said softly. I promise it won't happen again. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. Promises are easy to make, Emily. They're also easy to break. How am I supposed to move past this? It's not something I can just forget. Emily nodded slowly, wiping a tear. Please, Jake. I've apologized so many times. Just try to forgive me. I know I hurt you, but I'll make it up to you. I shook my head. Forgiveness might be possible, but forgetting isn't. That video is burned into my memory. If you want, I can send you a copy so you can see what I saw. She flinched, her face going pale. God, Jake, you don't have to be so harsh, she whispered, beginning to cry. I'm sorry. I never meant to put us here. Looking at her, I felt a pang of guilt mixed with anger. I'm not trying to hurt you, Emily. I just need you to understand the depth of the betrayal. With that, she ran out of the room, and I finished tidying up, resigned to my decision. The next morning, I secured a studio apartment near the park. It was unfurnished, so I ordered a bed and sofa, though the expenses stung. At lunch, I let my thoughts wander, considering the future. Reconciliation with Emily seemed unlikely, and my mind drifted to an old friend, Rachel Cooper. Rachel and I had gone through law school together and briefly dated before I met Emily. Though she chose someone else, we remained friends, and I respected her judgment. On impulse, I called her. Shelley, it's Jake. Jake. Wow, it's been a while. I heard about the thing with Shaw. Is that true? Yeah, I said. I could use a friend. I'm free for lunch if you want to talk, she offered. That'd be great. We met at a restaurant, exchanged hugs, and placed our orders. Rachel gave me a sympathetic look. All right, spill it, she said, ready to listen. And for the first time, I felt a bit of relief sharing the story with someone I trusted. After I finished recounting my story to Rachel, she paused thoughtfully. I've heard things about Ethan Shaw, she admitted. Rumors are swirling that he's in a downward spiral, maybe even heading for divorce. And some of the talk mentions Emily. I felt a stab of anger. What else did you hear? What did you see? Nothing definitive, just casual lunches, close encounters at the office. People have noticed that he's different lately. He's apparently been pursuing women around the office, and Emily seems to be his main target. So Emily isn't the only one? Maybe not, she shrugged, but she's the one people see him with all the time. Why didn't you tell me? I considered it, but didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. I assumed she'd stay professional, and I didn't want to overstep. She gave me a sympathetic look. What's your next step? I've signed a 6-month lease on a place and filed a separation agreement, but I'm not sure what to do next. We've talked, but I trailed off, feeling the weight of it all. It's rough. How are things with you and your family? Rachel gave a sad smile. My son, Will, is 3 now, starting preschool soon. Bill's away a lot for work, and when he's home, he's distant. Sometimes I wonder, but my problems don't compare to yours. No, please, I replied, grateful for the distraction. Sometimes it helps to focus on something else. Well, thanks, Jake. It's comforting to know I can talk to you too. You're a good friend. We hugged as we left, and I hoped Rachel would find her own peace. I heard later that Emily had returned to work. She wasn't fired, though she was on probation. A week passed, and she left me a few voicemails asking to talk. I ignored them, feeling more certain every day that our marriage was over. We had no children, and I wasn't willing to rebuild after this. The next Saturday, I walked by the house. I knocked on the patio door, and Emily's mom, Tess, opened it, surprised to see me. Is Emily here? I asked. She's out, but we'll be back soon, Tess replied cautiously. Look, Tess, Emily is obviously confused about everything, and I need to speak with her. Where did she go? Tess seemed uneasy. She went out with a friend, she answered. Just then, a new Mustang pulled up, and a young blonde guy stepped out, moving to open the passenger door. Emily stepped out, dressed up, looking like she was ready for a date. I quickly approached. Hey, Emily. Came to see you. She spun around, looking shocked, while the guy, James apparently, seemed nervous. This is James from work, Emily stammered. He gave me a ride home. I kept my voice controlled, though an edge of anger was unmistakable. Look, man, you got what you wanted. Unless you want more trouble, you'd better leave. He straightened, standing his ground a bit. But Emily quickly intervened. James, maybe it's best you go now. Sure thing, Emily, he replied, emphasizing her name with a smug smile before he got in the car and left. I turned to Emily. You couldn't even keep the agreement for a week? I'll be mentioning this when you get served the final papers. Jake, I'm sorry, she said, voice trembling. I was feeling vulnerable. I thought we were done. But I do love you, even if you can't see that. You just wanted some excitement, didn't you? I replied coldly. We don't have anything left to discuss. Get a lawyer. Walking away, I felt strangely numb, as though I had finally accepted the end. Emily was beautiful, and I knew men noticed her, but I wondered why she'd started giving in now. Maybe it would always be a mystery. About a week later, I managed to speak privately with Tess. She let me in, and I got straight to the point. I just want to understand what happened, I said. We were doing fine, and then she changed. Any idea why? Tess sighed, looking down. Emily has always struggled with self-esteem. She wasn't popular in high school. She was tall and thin, and the boys didn't notice her. Her two friends became cheerleaders, and she drifted away from them. She hesitated before continuing. Then, around 17, she started getting attention. Her looks filled out, her acne cleared, and suddenly, boys were interested. She went to prom with a football player, lost her innocence at 18. That summer was wild. Parties, boys, going out constantly. I worried but trusted her to make smart choices. Tess looked away, seeming lost in thought. I don't know if that explains why she did what she did, but maybe some old insecurities came back. I think she's always been afraid of not being seen. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of clarity. Maybe Emily's choices had little to do with me and more with her own unresolved insecurities. When Emily and I met in college, she didn't seem especially focused on carnal excitement, though she had more experience than I did. Since we'd been together, I'd believed she was faithful. Tess broke my thoughts, asking gently, You two were planning on having kids? Yes, I replied, feeling the weight of it. We were going to start a family, but that's over now. Maybe she feared that pregnancy would make her less attractive to other men, or maybe she was just looking for excitement. Tess sighed, seeming to understand. The Mustang guy, was it the same thing? She asked. I nodded. Probably. A young guy with a flashy car gave her attention, and she liked it. Maybe it was just craving something new. How long will you be around, Jake? Not too long, Tess. Take care, I said as I left. The divorce moved quickly. Emily relocated to an apartment closer to work, and we stopped communicating. After the divorce hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, Emily approached me. Jake, let's get lunch. I need to talk. It's on me, she said. We chose Red Lobster, sitting across from each other with a touch of awkwardness. She ordered soup, and I had an appetizer. After we ordered, she spoke softly. Jake, I messed up. I've been seeing a therapist, and she thinks maybe I was scared of settling down. Maybe I wanted to avoid having kids, or maybe I'm just not good at commitment. I was drawn to Ethan. I'm sorry, but I don't know if I'll ever fully understand myself. I watched her, feeling both sadness and resentment. What happened to Ethan anyway? She asked after a pause. He's back at work part-time, using a cane, and his wife left him, I replied. Harsh, she said, though she didn't seem particularly sympathetic. You really wrecked his life, Jake. You both wrecked mine, Emily, but maybe not as much as you've wrecked your own. She looked at me thoughtfully, almost sadly. Maybe you're right. I miss the life we had, Jake. I think about it a lot, actually. She paused, as if wrestling with the admission. I'm not sure if I'll find anyone who knew me like you did. I know it's over, but it's hard to find a replacement for that connection. I couldn't hide my frustration. So, you're just out there chasing excitement? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She nodded, almost amused by the irony. Maybe I am. A new face, a new thrill. It reminds me of feeling young and carefree, like back in college. But it's strange. No one understands me the way you did. As our food arrived, the mood lightened, but her expression shifted. She placed $30 on the table and said, We should go. Startled, I rose, and she glanced at me, blushing as she noticed my reaction. Our waitress, Lily, smirked. Come back later, big guy, she said with a wink, as Emily took my hand and led me outside. Her apartment was nearby. As soon as we were in the elevator, she pulled me close, kissing me with an intensity that was hard to resist. Her hands roamed over me, her breath warm and insistent. By the time we reached her floor, we were both a bit breathless. The doors opened to reveal a couple of neighbors who looked shocked, but Emily ignored them, leading me quickly to her door. Once inside, clothes fell to the floor as we stumbled into her bedroom. She pushed me onto the bed, her eyes gleaming with something wild. Take me, Jake, she whispered. When I hesitated, she laughed, flipping me onto my back. Told you I'd pin you down. Our first encounter was intense, leaving us both spent and breathless. We lay there, catching our breath, until Emily murmured, "It's a bit crazy, isn't it? Celebrating our divorce like this." She smiled, leaning in close. "That was the best it's ever been, Jake," she said. Something in her tone stirred me, and soon we were drawn together again, reliving the passion we'd once shared. Afterward, we shared a light meal, still undressed, laughing and talking as though the years hadn't passed between us. She finished her dessert and looked at me with a playful gleam. "So, should we talk or keep going?" Without hesitation, I took her hand, leading her back to the bedroom. We repeated our encounter several times, each one familiar yet exciting, as if we were saying our final goodbyes in the only way we knew. It was a mix of nostalgia and closure, each of us knowing how to push the other's limits. And as we lay there, I realized that this was, in a strange way, the end of our story, both of us finding a way to let go. Neither Emily nor I won in our dynamic, but it was exhilarating. The next morning, we were close again before she made breakfast. As we ate, I felt it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Emily, do you think we can maintain this?" I asked, half hoping for clarity. She looked at me with a wry smile. "Jake, marrying was probably a mistake. I tried to keep my promise to be faithful, but it's just not in me. That doesn't mean I want you out of my life, though. I wasn't kidding with that James Taylor song. I'll be here when you need me. There'll come a time when I want to settle down, maybe have kids," I replied, wondering if that might have driven her to other men. "Maybe, but for now, I love being with you, Jake. You're the best, and I mean that. As long as we both feel this, I think we could keep it going." That weekend, we hardly left the apartment, staying in bed except to eat, shower, or answer the occasional knock at the door. Saturday afternoon, Emily answered a knock in her robe, revealing Fiona, the woman from the elevator. "Emily, I haven't seen you around much," Fiona said. "Just checking to see if you're okay." Emily smiled and looked back at me with a mischievous grin. "I'm doing great, Fiona," she said, glancing at me. Fiona caught on quickly, smiling knowingly. "Enjoy yourself, Emily, you're lucky," she added with a wink. After Fiona left, Emily turned to me, laughing. "You gave her quite the view. Maybe we should have invited her in for coffee. Maybe she'd like it with cream," I teased. "But I wouldn't want her cholesterol getting too high." Emily just laughed, pulling me toward the bedroom once more. Monday came, and we returned to our routines without having resolved much. At work, I mulled over our situation. A committed relationship with Emily was out of the question, but as long as the chemistry was strong, I was fine with our arrangement. Until I was ready to settle down for good, I'd be cautious. Emily, on the other hand, had embraced a life of casual encounters, which she made clear by mentioning 3 other men she'd been with since our divorce. Surprisingly, I didn't mind. In fact, her promiscuity was oddly exciting. I was careful, making sure to get regular STD tests, all of which were clear. I ran into Fiona one day after leaving Emily's place. She gave me a warm look. "Hey there, I remember you," she said with a smile. "You made quite the impression." "Good to see you too, Fiona," I replied, returning her smile. "Emily mentioned you were single." "Divorced, actually. It's been a year and a half," she said. "Being single at my age isn't easy." "Honestly, you look fantastic," I replied. "Care to invite me in?" "Jake, right?" she confirmed. leading me to her apartment across from Emily's. Just as we reached her door, Emily stepped out of her place, noticing us and breaking into laughter. Well, quite the catch, Jake. I didn't see this side of you when we were married, she teased, glancing at Fiona. Enjoy yourself. Jake's quite the guy. She winked at Fiona before sauntering off, leaving us smiling awkwardly. Inside, Fiona led me to her well-furnished bedroom, where we spent a memorable night. Fiona, at 40 with grown kids, was experienced and kind. I genuinely enjoyed my time with her, and we promised to keep in touch, a promise I gladly upheld. Life carried on, and one day outside the courthouse, I saw Lily, the waitress from Red Lobster, who recognized me with a faint smile. I remember you now, Jake, right? I didn't see your face much that day, but I remember you and Emily. That's right. Are you still at the restaurant? I asked. Part-time. I also do some modeling, she replied, her blue eyes bright. She was striking, with a slim figure and a confident smile. So, are you and Emily back together? No, I clarified. The day we met you was right after our divorce. We kind of found ourselves reinvigorated afterward. Interesting, she mused. Are you two still seeing each other? We're seeing each other, I guess, but it's casual. We're compatible in certain ways, but not in others. She grinned. Maybe you should take me out sometime. I'm off today. I was intrigued. How about dinner at my place? I'll cook. Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it, Jake. That evening, Lily arrived around 6:30, looking stunning in a chic evening dress. I cooked fried chicken and fried rice, and we shared a nice conversation over dinner. Lily, 25, balanced modeling gigs with her waitressing job. She wasn't married, but had recently ended a long-term relationship. I admired her independence and sense of humor. At that time, I was 34, working steadily in a successful law firm, driving a good car, and living comfortably. Our night together was lighthearted and enjoyable, and Lily's company added a refreshing layer to my life. I was keeping things casual with Emily, exploring this strange new freedom I hadn't known before. Between Emily, Fiona, and now Lily, I found myself adjusting to a life I hadn't anticipated, but one I was curious to navigate. Our time with each other was casual, yet strangely fulfilling. Each connection felt like a different kind of closure. As I spent more time with Lily, I found myself ready for commitment. She was appealing, intelligent, and I decided to see where a relationship with her could go. After our first night out, she kissed me at her doorstep but didn't rush into anything more. As things progressed, I felt myself falling for her. By our third date, we became intimate, and I felt a real connection, something meaningful. That night, I knew it was time to end things with the other women I'd been seeing. A few weeks later, after a particularly passionate encounter, Lily revealed she enjoyed rougher experiences sometimes, something that suited us both well. I shared more about my past, admitting, I think I'm in love with you, Lily. I've stopped seeing other women. She looked relieved. Since meeting you, you're the only one I've dated, and I haven't even kissed anyone else. But I'm concerned about your trust issues. Will you always have doubts about me? I was honest. I won't deny some concern, but if you commit to being only with me, I'll do my best to work on it. All right then, she said, smiling. We'll both stay faithful. Deal? 2 weeks later, I proposed, and we married 3 months after that in a modest local ceremony. Lily's parents traveled from Chicago, and I invited Emily and Fiona, too. I'd introduced Lily to Emily after proposing, and though Emily was friendly, I sensed a hint of sadness. Ours hadn't been a love-based relationship, but I knew she'd miss our physical connection, just as I would. Lily and I honeymooned in the Bahamas, enjoying a beautiful trip before settling into my apartment. Soon, we decided to start a family, and within 3 years, we were blessed with 2 children, Thomas and Eileen. Around the same time, I made partner at my firm, and we bought a house in a nearby suburb. Life moved on. Emily married a coworker named Tom Benson a year after I married Lily. Tom was successful, and they had 2 sons, Ben and Dylan. Coincidentally, they moved close to us, and our families frequently crossed paths. Our children even attended the same preschool. Lily and Emily became friends, though Tom seemed wary around me, likely sensing the lingering chemistry Emily and I shared. Lily trusted me and Emily enough not to worry, but Tom wasn't as at ease. Tom and I shared a passion for baseball and joined a local men's league. We also had season tickets to MLB games, attending a few together. I sensed that he wanted reassurance about Emily and me, so one day after a game, I decided to be direct. Tom, I started, I want you to know that I'll never be with Emily again. We're both happily married now, but I can see this bothers you. He looked at me directly. I appreciate you saying that, Jake, but I have my doubts. You two obviously shared something intense in the past. We did, I admitted. But that's in the past. We were compatible, but I'm committed to Lily. Emily has probably told you the same. Tom hesitated. I see the way you two look at each other. Like at the club dance last month. It seems like you shared something unforgettable. Sometimes I even wonder who she's thinking of when we're intimate. Me, you, or some fantasy. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. Not usually, I replied, but I'd be lying if I said she never crossed my mind. We had some great times. Maybe even better ones than I've had since. That's what worries me, Jake, he replied, clearly relieved to voice his feelings. Thanks for being upfront about it. Our talk made things easier between us, though I hadn't been entirely honest. The closeness I'd shared with Emily after our divorce was unique, unmatched by any relationship since. It lingered in my thoughts, especially when I saw her, and I suspected she felt the same. Perhaps if we both reach our 80s, we'll find a way to rekindle that passion in a simpler time.